everybody to the continuation of my series on posthuman transformation. This is a teaser series going through each chapter of my book published through Cambridge University Press. I've already gone through the introduction in chapters 1 through 6. I encourage everybody to review those or check those out if you haven't already. Today is chapter 7. Chapter 7 is called Plotinus as a Living Daimon, and in this chapter I talk about Plotinus, who is one of the most famous Platonists of all time, flourishes in the mid-3rd century, and has an equally famous disciple, Porphyry. I have occasion to talk about both Plotinus and Porphyry in the chapter, but for this particular presentation I will be focusing only on Plotinus. When Plotinus died of a ravaging plague around the year 270, one of his disciples went to a temple of Apollo and asked about the destiny of Plotinus's soul. And it was told him in verse, through an oracular response, that Plotinus, after death, was a daemon, no longer a man, formerly a human being, a daimonic soul in a daimonic troop of beings. And the oracle ends by calling Plotinus a blessed one, who endured a number of contests and now travels round with the blessed daimones. Who was Plotinus? You can find a lot of information on the internet, but to sum up, he is an Egyptian born along the Nile streams, classically educated in Alexandria under the most famous philosopher of the time, Ammonius Saccas. He stays with Ammonius for over a decade and becomes what was perhaps his chief disciple and successor. He wanted to visit the lands of the East, Persia and India specifically, and so joined under some capacity the army of Gordian as it marched toward Iran around the year 243. That particular Roman expedition was a complete disaster, and Plotinus, along with the army, fled back west after Gordian himself was killed. Plotinus did not sail for Alexandria. Instead, he went to Rome, where he set up his school and flourished there in the mid-3rd century. It was only very late in Plotinus's life that he accepted Porphyry as a student, and recognizing his literary talents as a student of Longinus, he allowed Porphyry to become his editor in the 260s. And so Porphyry, over the course of some 30 years, edited the lectures of Plotinus. And shortly before 300, some 30 years after Plotinus had died, Porphyry published the Enneads, 6 books of 9 treatises of Plotinus, some of the richest deposits of philosophical lore ever written. It is, thankfully, and has been translated several times, and always worth your perusal. Now, Plotinus does have a treatise on our guardian daimon, which I highly recommend everybody to go read. In the Lowell Classical Library, you'll find Plotinus's treatises, and there's also a more recent edition of the treatises put out by Lloyd P. Garrison from Cambridge University Press. And the reality is, however, that Plotinus speaks about daimons occasionally in a scattered way throughout many of his treatises. And I include all the references in the book, but suffice it to say that for Plotinus, a daimon is a, quote, facsimile or imitation, mimema of God, dependent on a God fully. And that daimones are charged with managing organized religion, and that one of their chief roles is guarding human beings. They are our guardian angels, as it were. Diviner daimones are transformed into gods, which are purely contemplative beings. All daimones are intellectual beings, which means that they are immaterial. Many of you know that Plotinus has a tripartite, or perhaps Trinitarian, division of the divine. He divides it into the unknowable one, the intellect, focused entirely on the one, and the soul, or world, the soul. All three levels are manifestations and reflections of the one as it can be perceived in this world. And originally, human souls were one with the world soul called their father. But these souls began to forget their father. In their desire, as Plotinus says, to belong to themselves and to be self-determined, they engaged in an act of audacity and ceased to behold intelligible beauty. Consequently, as a kind of desire to be free and to have autonomy, souls fell into isolation and weakness, and ultimately into individual bodies, which confined them and caused them, as in traditional Platonic lore, to forget their higher nature and to also be hindered in attaining their destiny, which is reunification with the divine intellect. What most Platonists reserved for a future life, Plotinus was, following a passage of Plato, willing to allow to happen on earth. That is, the soul of a human being, even in the body, could be transformed into a daimon. And one did this by following one's own higher self, or daimon. To quote Plotinus, if a person is able to follow the daimon within, it exists at a higher level. The person is then raised to a higher level, living that daimon's life and giving the preeminence to that better portion of the self toward which the person is being led. Unquote. In other words, we all have a daimonic guardian who is a better and superior and more divine version of ourselves. And insofar as we replicate that more divine version of ourselves, we ourselves, that is, our souls, become daimonic, and our guardian daimon is then replaced by a god. There are a couple anecdotes that are helpful for understanding Plotinus. One is the story of Plotinus's disciple Aemilius, who was arguably a much closer disciple than Porphyry. He was in Plotinus's company for some 18 years. And Aemilius was a religious soul and participated in the many festivities and festivals of Rome's civic religion. And at one point, he invited his master Plotinus to engage in one of these rituals. And Plotinus replied something that sent the shiver of goosebumps up the spine of his disciples by saying that the daimones represented in these Roman religious practices, many of them loud and boisterous on the city streets, were not the kind of religion that he practiced. He believed that those particular daimones should, as he said, come to me, not I to them. On another occasion, Plotinus readily agreed to have his guardian daimon called up by an Egyptian priest in a sort of seance-like rite, which took place in the great temple of Isis at Rome. And at the height of this particular ceremony, the Egyptian priest called out in amazement to Plotinus, quote, "Blessed art thou, whose companion daimon is not one of subordinate species, but a god," unquote. Now, it's interesting why Plotinus would participate in this rite as opposed to the other rites. Iamblichus, who is Plotinus's heir in many respects, although he took a different path, knew of a theurgic rite in which one could set up a god as a guardian and leader of one's soul. I hypothesize that it might be that this is what the Egyptian priest promised to do for Plotinus. Or, as in Porphyry's interpretation, it was simply discovered that by birth Plotinus had a higher soul, and that his guardian was therefore a god, not a simple daimon, which would mean that Plotinus himself, or rather his soul, had already achieved a daimonic transfiguration and was a daimon itself. As Plotinus lay dying, the doctor who was administering to him reported that when Plotinus breathed his last, he saw under the bed of Plotinus a snake crawl into a hole and disappear. Now, in modern thought, this might just be a case where someone wasn't properly keeping house and allowed a snake to enter. But the snake is doubtless something more. It represents Plotinus' soul as it left this earth. And a snake is not only a symbol of wisdom in Greco-Roman thought, it is a symbol of the good daimon. And daimones, good daimones, in the Alexandrian context, were symbolized by snakes. So the snake leaving is Plotinus as a daimon leaving this earth. And thus the oracle of Apollo made sense, that when he left this earth, being already a daimon, he was ready to join the daimonic truth, a blessed daimon himself. For those of you who are interested, I'll just offer a few suggestions for further reading on the topic of Neoplatonic daimonology. The standard survey is now in French, André Timothin's La démonologie platonicienne. If you can read French, that's the book to get. But there's also a fantastic series of essays in English now called Neoplatonic Demons, and this is edited by Luc Brisson. And finally, if you can track down this article by Karen Alt, Man and Daimones, to the Daimonis Influence of Man's Life in the Philosopher and Society in Late Antiquity, this is well worth your read. These are the scholarly material that I recommend as a launchpad. You can use my book, all the footnotes and the references to find even more resources. Again, my book is called Posthuman Transformation in Ancient Mediterranean Thought. It was published by Cambridge University Press in 2021. It's now cheaply available in paperback. I hope that many of you will consider purchasing it and using it as a companion as you go through these videos and checking all my notes and suggestions, and also going the extra mile and letting me know what you think and what your thoughts are in the comment section. For now, I sincerely thank everybody for coming along. It's been fantastic having you. I hope that you'll join Patreon, and if you're not already there, message me. Check that every day. I hope that all of you do well in your endeavors and never stop learning.